Welcome. I'm WTOP Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller, and my guest today is Sherry Thompson, the Executive Vice President and Head of Affordable Housing at Walker Dunlop. Welcome, and thank you. Well, we're going to look at a big issue around the country and certainly here in the Washington area, affordable housing. First of all, let's start with the 30,000-foot view. What do you think some of the factors are that have led to a lack of affordable housing?
There are several factors. In fact, there are a lot of factors, but some of the biggest are regulation and zoning, it's capital issues, it's supply issues, and it's NIMBYism. It's probably nothing you haven't already heard a lot. But if I had to identify the biggest one right now, I'd say it's the regulatory issues. That lengthens the time that it takes to get a project built. It adds to the cost, and so we're getting less projects in the ground in a time when we really need it.
And yet there seems to be, as always, a huge demand for it.
Yeah, there is. The demand is way outstripping the supply that we have. And not only that, but we lose units every year to obsolescence, and that's not being addressed either. So it's a problem, and the crisis just continues to exacerbate.
As you know, many communities have barriers to affordable housing. What are some of the ways that those can be brought down or at least eased so that there can be more units made available?
Yeah, you know, the real problem in affordable housing is it's very specialized and it's very complex. So the solutions are often at the local level while the money's at the federal and the state level. So we have to be really creative when we put deals together and we try to get projects built. I'll give you one really good example of how that happened. In the city of San Antonio, Texas, we have a developer that's developing a project. They're redeveloping an old Air Force base. So they're putting almost 600 units of affordable housing on the project. And the city of San Antonio is part of the transaction. So one of their governmental entities is a general contractor. It's the general partner, and they own the land. And what that does is it brings down the cost to build, and it brings down the cost to operate that project over time, which makes it viable for the developer to be able to restrict the units to affordable housing. We also put a loan on the project. So Walker Dunlop facilitated a Fannie Mae loan and about $60 million in tax credit equity for that project. So really, if you think about all of that I just said, it's just bringing all of those things together. It takes a lot to get all of that done, but the result is the city of San Antonio is going to have 600 more units of affordable housing.
And I would guess when you have a successful project like this one sounds like it's going to be, that can provide a template for other communities. Maybe not every community, of course, has an old Air Force Base facility, but at least in terms of the funding and how these entities can come together.
Yeah, I think we have good test cases around the country, and there are good precedents of how to do it. But every city, and if you go back to the regulation, right, every city has its own rules and regulations. Every county has what it needs, and so it's very nuanced. We try to replicate it. Tax abatements is one way that we replicate a lot of over the country. Texas is really good at that, and we're seeing that in other places as well. But we continue to see really creative solutions coming out of a lot of places, which is important.
And one of the things that has been considered is multifamily housing. How does that play a role in eliminating some of the barriers that we're talking about?
Yeah, so I'm sure, as you know, multifamily housing right now is critically important generally in housing, and the demand is really high. I would say the not so secret is that it's supply. It's supply at any level, not just affordable housing, that's going to help the crisis. There's currently strong demand for rental housing, but people who are seeking affordable rental housing are finding it challenging to find it at a reasonable price point and quality housing. And what's going on today in terms of development and the slowdown of construction, we think is going to have a negative effect by 2026. There'll be less supply, generally. And so in a lot of markets. And when that happens, rents go up, and they go up at every level. So that pushes everybody down a price point, and it exacerbates the affordability crisis even more. So, I mean, the bottom line on that one is just more supply at any level is a good thing.
Yeah, and as you're well aware, even when all of these barriers are overcome and a project comes online, then the lineup for people that are trying to get those units is huge. I was reading recently that when they, for example, did affordable housing units at the Wharf here in DC, there were something like 4,000 applicants for some of these units, and obviously there's only so many that
Right.
can be delivered on.
Yeah, the programs work, but the wait lists are very long in a lot of places. And so we can't get enough shovels in the ground, enough units built, so that wait list just keeps getting longer and longer.
So what are some of the things that can be done to specifically get these new builds off the ground, the incentives, you've touched on some of them, to actually get them going?
I would say regulatory hurdles and zoning and fixing some of those issues are the most important. Because here's the bottom line, even if you have the money, you have the land, you have your capital, from the time you buy the land until you actually have people living there, it can be 2 to 4 years. That's just too long. A lot of that is a regulatory red tape. It's zoning approvals, it's state approvals, it's environmental concerns. All of that takes time and it drives up the cost. Hundreds of thousands of man hours of time are spent on regulatory. It's just too much. And so what that does is it just lengthens the time it takes, and it drives the cost to the point that it becomes prohibitive for a lot of people, and a lot of the developers abandon those projects. You really need to have debt in order to get a deal done. You have to have debt, you have to have tax credits, you have to have other subsidies, and probably a federal loan, a state loan. There's a lot that goes into it, and that probably sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo, but the bottom line on that one is it just takes years to get all the approvals and get the capital together, and that just lengthens the time it takes to get more housing. And every time that happens, the developers are fighting against time and money, and it means less projects are going into the ground.
Yeah, I remember talking to a developer years ago related to the project in Pentagon Row, and the fact that it's mixed use, and you have retail, and you had a grocery store, and then you have, try to get affordable housing within projects. And this person was saying that each of those elements was a regulatory hurdle, and that's why you don't see as many of those type of projects. I mean, they are coming online more in the last decade, I would say, but to your point, I think a lot of people don't realize how many hoops developers have to go through to get there.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing a lot in the DC Metro are doing this is inclusionary zoning, where if you want to build a project like that, and you have to put a certain amount of affordable housing in it. But there's a different financing and capital structure for your affordable than there is for your conventional, than there is for your retail, than there is for your grocery store. And so not only do you have to get all of your projects lined up to build together, you have to get the capital together, and then there's typically agreements between each of the lenders and each of the stages and each of the regulatory that has to be negotiated. So it takes a long time. I mean, it's great when it happens. Those projects are really value add because people are getting housing that is close to transportation, close to retail at affordable prices, but it is definitely takes a village.
And one thing that I know you're aware of, and many people are aware of, is for better or for worse, even though people want to help people that need assistance and get affordable housing, there is a stigma related to it when a project, sometimes people hear about affordable housing. And what are some of the things that you think that can be done to kind of overcome that stigma?
That's a really good question. I would say that that stigma it's old. Mm-hmm. And when you think about, and we do this a lot when we talk to people, when you think about affordable housing and you think about who lives there, those people are really the people that we all work with. I mean, it's firemen, it's social workers, it's administrative assistants. They deserve to live in the places that they are working, and it just isn't happening today.
One of the issues, as you know, with affordable housing is there's a lot of misconceptions that swirl around it when people hear the words. Sometimes they think of it that it's something that it's really not. I wonder if you could address that and how it can be mitigated.
Yeah, there are so many misconceptions. I think one, that's a really excellent question that you're asking, because a lot of people don't ask that. The one major misconception is around rent control. There's been a lot of that in the press, and that will solve the affordability issue, which is really not a good assumption. The problem with rent control is that when there's rent control, it disincentivizes investors and developers and owners. So there's less investment in a community, which devalues the real estate. It also means that there's less money that the developer is getting to renovate the project and keep it in good and habitable condition. So the reality of rent control is that it actually does harm, it doesn't do good. It creates just a terrible vicious cycle. Another misconception that I think is more broad and maybe more what you're talking about is that affordable housing devalues real estate. People don't want people who are affordable to live in their neighborhood. And that's, if I showed you a picture of a brand new affordable housing and a conventional project that was built in Alexandria, Virginia, you wouldn't know the difference. There's no real research that shows that it devalues. In fact, in Alexandria, there was a small test case that actually showed that property values went up. But that's not what people think. And that creates a lot of NIMBYism. Those people that live in those, they're the people that really power our cities. It's everyone from your social worker to your administrative assistant, to your plumber, to your fireman, and they should have the right to live where they're working.
Yeah, I was speaking with a lawmaker who said that sometimes it's just a matter of the language that you use. He noted that when he proposes legislation in Congress, if he talks about subsidized housing or anything like that versus tax credits and incentives, that can help him move the ball on legislation, because depending on the person's point of view, they may or may not be as accepting as that.
Yeah, I think people hear subsidized and they think of like housing that is at the very, very low end of the spectrum. It's people who are can't afford anything and are in public housing. That's a lot different than when you talk about subsidized housing being low-income housing tax credits and other creative subsidies. And that's the area that really needs help, that all the way to naturally occurring housing. And so I think really what we can do is just keep educating people, keep talking about it and making sure people understand what that means, who that is, and how that's affecting, our communities.
Yeah, and given everything that we've just talked about, I was looking at a Walker and Dunlop poll that found that there's a growing appetite for investments in affordable housing. How could access to capital be expanded, and can you build on the fact that there is that desire apparently?
Yeah, we did that poll at an affordable housing conference. It was great. Our marketing team went out and polled probably at least 1,000 people on that. And there is a huge appetite for it. Investors are getting pressure from the capital that comes into them to invest socially. I think with that, though, if you go back to how we can get access in, it's really the government programs that work the best. So we talked about the low-income housing tax credit program and the Section 8. They're good programs. They're proven programs. They put a lot of people in housing, and they help developers build that housing and restrict it. They're just, unfortunately, it's already a very large part of the federal budget, so there's just limited amount of capital. I would also say that regulation and it needs to be updated. So a lot of the regulation is old. It hasn't changed with the times, and that can help us get more units in the ground. So I'll give you a couple examples of that. FHA is known as the affordable lender. Their regulation probably hasn't been updated for the most part since the 1960s.
Wow.
But recently, their multifamily team was able to update some of the requirements and loosen some constraints. And we think that's going to double the amount of housing, particularly new construction, that they can finance every year. That's real material positive change.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that tracks with lawmakers that I've spoken to on Capitol Hill, that they have said that this structure at the federal level is just outdated, and they're trying piece by piece to kind of break it up and allow, creative cities, for example, or counties to do different things as they experiment things. And it's, as you know, sometimes it's the lab of the city or the municipality or at the state level that gets you to bigger programs at the federal level.
Correct. And we're seeing cities do that. The city of Denver, the mayor has been very proactive in trying to figure out how to make change, but he had a bill that was a sales tax that would go into an affordable housing fund that was voted down very narrowly, but voted down by the voters. And that probably was, I think it was $100 million a year that they estimated would go into a fund to create affordable housing. So again, it's educating the public on what it is that's important in that.
And what do you think, as we're at the start of the year, the outlook is for this year and the coming years? You touched on a little bit that things might slow down eventually, but for now, what is your thought about as we move forward?
The outlook for affordable or just in general?
For affordable housing related to, for example, the interest rates and that type of thing. How does that all kind of mix together?
Yeah, interest rates are a problem right now. I mean, they're higher and they've been higher for longer, and there's a little more variability than people would like in it. When rates go up, it makes it harder to pencil out a deal. But there's subsidies, as we talked about, that are coming into those deals. The affordable projects generally can bear that a little better. And when they get those tax credits, they have a specific length of time that they have to use them by. So what happens is it eats away into the profits of the developer. And as long as those don't get down to an untenable level, they'll still go ahead and develop the project. So we're seeing those continue. We're seeing consolidation in the space where people that have never been in affordable housing are reaching out and saying, we want to do this, we want to understand it. Again, it's complex, it's specialized. We do a lot of education on that, and a lot of teams are really starting to pair up with more regional developers who know what they're doing, but they don't have as much capital. So we expect that business to continue. Again, particularly in the LIHTC space, though, or the low-income housing tax credit space, there's just a maximum cap on how much is there every year, and there's massive competition to get that money. So there's lots of projects that could and should be built that just aren't.
And even with all these hurdles and these regulatory issues, it does sound like you're fairly optimistic about what's happening, at least in terms of the trends, the creativity, the effort to try to find different ways to bring affordable housing to the market.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing that within our developers. We're seeing that within cities and states. And we're actually, the example, like the HUD example, we're seeing even at the federal level. There's still work to be done. The tax credit program has bipartisan support to make changes that, again, would release some additional tax dollars to be used in that program, but it's caught with the larger tax bill. It's been there for over a year. So there's definitely steps ahead, and then there's things that are still holding us back.
And yet, despite all of that, there is seemingly a desire for more affordable housing. I wonder if you could give your final thoughts on what you think things are looking forward.
Yeah, thank you. There's definitely a desire, and we're seeing more and more inquiries about it, people trying to be creative. We're seeing capital that wants to be in the space. The barriers are still there, so I think take away that it takes a village. It really takes a village to put all these transactions together and to get the shovels in the ground. So it's creativity and collaboration that are critical, and it's private sector and government working together to find solutions that work for everyone.
All right, well, it's going to be another interesting year related to this issue. I'd like to leave it there. I'm WTOP Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller, and I'd like to thank today's guest, Sherry Thompson, the Executive Vice President and Head of Affordable Housing at Walker Dunlop. And for more on this discussion, visit WTOP.com and search Balancing the Housing Equation.